Faster than a Garrett Cole four-seamer. More powerful than Aaron Judge. Able to leap over arbitration with a single bound. Look up into the sky.
It's a bird. Oh, it's a home run.
No, it's the Super Twos. Baseball, arbitration, and the American way. Welcome to Baseball Biz, where we cover the business and the sport of the great American pastime. I'm Mark Corbett, your host, with co-host Brandon Noe. Today we'll discuss the nature of arbitration, Super Twos, and the tender deadline. That is tender, Tender, not Tinder, the dating service. Although I'm sure there's some similarities. I mean, we're looking at two parties who are negotiating on whether or not they want to hook up. Well, there it goes, Brandon. Here we are, man. December 2nd has come and passed, and so has the non-tender deadline. What's your take when you first look at this?
Well, there was a lot of action very quickly for something that it honestly really snuck up on us, and we really didn't know anything about until what felt like the last minute.
Well, that's kind of how it evolved, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of spooky when you think about it. We have the regular baseball season. We get all involved with everything with, the World Series. Thank goodness. It's the most exciting thing you have. But then you say, what happens after that? Well, you hear there's going to be a winter meetings when all the owners and the general manager, everybody's going to get together. And we know that there's some negotiating going on, but a lot of us didn't know necessarily that there is a non-tender deadline. And basically, we're kidding there a moment ago about what Tinder being not a dating service, but it is indeed people trying to agree on something. One of the things is that every team at this point is allowed basically a 40-man roster before they have to narrow it down during the regular season to about 26. Some of those guys are going to go down to minor leagues. Some of those guys are going to get traded. But the non-tender deadline means, okay, of the guys who I have on my 40-man roster right now, I'm either going to sign a contract with them already, I'm going to tender them an offer, but I have to do it by December 2nd, or I could have last week said, I'm sorry, you're designated for assignment, we're letting you go, or just wait till December 2nd and not put a contract out there, and that becomes a non-tender.
I mean, I'm no expert on, the behind-the-scenes baseball, the business side of it. That's what you're for, obviously. But is the tender, is it like the franchise tag in the NFL where if you're given it, you have to take it? Or is it something that you can say, hey, I don't really like this, I don't really like these terms, and then you end up going to arbitration?
Well, that's a good question, and I can't address the NFL, but I will tell you this, that the tender agreement is just that. It's saying, hey, I am tendering you a contract. It's not an agreement. I'm tendering you a contract. I am interested in having you with my team. Here is my offer to you. Now, if I am the team and you are the player, you actually have till February for you and I to get together on a salary. Now, whatever those terms may be in that tender, so by then, hopefully we will have all that nailed down. If not, we'll go to arbitration. And that means a third party comes in, listens to both of our sides of why we think we should make which one. So you're coming to me and saying, well, Mark, I've been at bat. I've been doing I've been here 4 years with a team, and I'm thinking instead of you paying me $500,000 a year, you need to be paying me about $2 million a year for what I'm doing at the plate and on the field. I say, we love you, Brandon, but we think you're worth this as a fourth-year player, and that's like $1.25 million. Well, that's where it goes back and forth, where we're talking about from the time it's been tendered to when there's actually an agreement. And in between, that's a lot can happen. So I'm not saying it's going to last all the way to February. I mean, as a matter of fact, even though we had the non-tender deadline yesterday, a lot of different teams have already signed their players just the same week. They've already got them with an agreement. And the contract's been tendered and it has been signed.
That makes much more sense. I knew what arbitration, I knew what that was. I just never really knew how they got to it. So the tender deadline was just something I never paid attention to because I didn't know how it worked.
Well, most of us are fans, and why would we care? It's like, I want my team, I want my players, and I don't really care if you're what you're paid or what you're not paid. I'm more interested that you keep my guy there, and the mind is like, why is that person still there? Why do you still have this guy on your team? He doesn't need to be there. You only have so much room on your roster. Get rid of him so you can trade and get somebody else.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I think.
I was looking at something too the other day with the Rays radio blog, and I thought they did an excellent job in taking a look at why somebody would tender a contract, why an organization would tender a contract to a player or not. And, you're going to tender a contract if you believe, one, that player has value, that there's something there that you think that they've done fantastic, or two, maybe you're looking at it and you're saying, yeah, I can get them for like $1.25 million, but I think I could trade them somebody else maybe later for like $2.5 million worth of other players, or maybe expect that much more. So there's that. Are there the others saying, well, I know they had a tough year. They had Tommy John surgery, and they're slowly coming back. So these are different factors that a team is going to think about before they actually really make a decision.
So it's kind of like a cheaper alternative to going through the free agency route.
Yeah, and here it is too. When we're talking about tendering a contract, this is for people who aren't free agents. Here's the other thing, is if I don't tender you a contract, yes, you are automatically a free agent at that point. I've basically cut you loose. So, you could be out there with 4 years of experience, but at the major league level, normally you have to go 6 years before you're a free agent. But I guess in many ways, if I cut you loose, it's up to you to go ahead and negotiate with some other team, if they'll take you.
That makes much more sense now that I've actually had it explained to me, instead of this fancy words that the glossary and everybody else seems to put out there.
Well, we got to make it as interesting as possible. I've tried to go through the entire collective bargaining agreement, which is like 300 plus pages between MLB and and the Players Association, but I got dizzy after a while. And I'll probably take that up when I'm maybe going to spend you would think this is probably the best time to do it during COVID, just so I can just nestle down inside of the house and bored with nothing else but Netflix, actually sit down and read the entire bargaining agreement. But the thing of it is, a couple of things we talked about, and one of them was designated for assignment. Then we're talking about the tender deadline, when the contracts have to be tendered. So that's good. It means something's not completely being drawn out. Here's a date it has to be done. And we were talking about who is actually eligible for arbitration as opposed to already having a contract for 1 year or multiple years. And what that is we've said before, as soon as you step up to the majors, you begin a 6-year journey to becoming a free agent. Now, here comes a little extra something. And that is that first 3 years, you don't really get any arbitration whatsoever. You are there at basically the minimum wage, $565,000, I believe it is. Heck, a minimum wage you and I talked about before, but $565,000. And at that point comes the 4th year where the pre-arbitration can begin. What we're looking at that point is, we talk about, you think you're worth 5 and I say you're worth 2.5 or whatever it may be, the difference. That's when it comes to play. However, now you may remember this before with Kris Bryant. You remember when we were talking about his eligibility, because it's not just flat 3 years you were in the majors. It was like, was it like 170 some odd days? I can't think of it exactly at the moment, that you actually had to be on the team for that year. Even though there's only 162 games, you had to be assigned at the major league level for over 170 days. Kris Bryant came up short a couple of days of something of that.
Didn't he sue or go to a hearing or something for that to try and get the extra couple of days so he can get to the Super 2?
Yeah, he did, and I think they worked all that out. But here, the Super 2 is this. Is that guy who's been there for almost 3 years, and instead of getting that extra, whatever it takes, 170 some odd days, There's 22% of people who are just short of that who are given the opportunity to be at 3 years. So that means that I think last year it was like 1 year and 2 years and 155 days, something along those lines. And then another year, I think it went down as low as 130 some odd. I don't know what that's going to be this year. I thought we'd have some information on that because with a 60-game season, obviously none of that makes sense. So I'm thinking they're going to do a ratio that down, probably something like 70 days. But that's what a Super 2 is. That means where we're talking about people for the first 6 years as a Major League Baseball player, after the first 3, they can go ahead and get into arbitration and negotiate with the team. And Super 2s, they can come in just a little earlier because they were just short of 3 years.
So it's basically like, hey, you were close enough, we'll just give it to you.
Kind of, but, they had to set some kind of bar on that. So the Players Association, MLB, came up with that and said the top 22% of those people who were just beneath that threshold would be able to come up.
Man, MLB doesn't need all these fancy explanations. We just dumped it down right there.
Well, that's what we do is we dump it down on BaseballBiz. Yeah, whether by actually intent or not.
Leave it to us to dumb it down.
There you go. So, yeah, that's what it is. I mean, so let's take a look at what's actually happened on December 2nd with the non-tender deadline. Who was tendered, who was actually given the contract, and who was said, guys, we love you very much, but we're going to let you find something else. So let's go ahead and we'll kind of run down some folks here. Let's start out. We'll do it alphabetically here. Start with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, this year, they had 3 players who would have met that criteria as far as being arbitration eligible. And let's see, the ones they did a non-tender with, nope, none. They actually signed, or at least tendered a contract to, catcher Carson Kelly, and then Caleb Smith and Luke Weaver, a couple of pitchers. So that's where they are. Let's see, the Braves. Outfielder Adam Duvall. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, he was coming off a 16-homer season in 57 games, but he's now a free agent. Maybe it was a matter of what they thought they were going to come together with on money. Take a look at the Orioles. Hanser Alberto, he's second baseman. He's the only one I think they did not tender a contract to. And let's see. I think they also received a couple of minor leaguers a couple of minor leaguers from the Angels. There were some other trades going on. Now they're at 32 in their roster. If we take a look at the Red Sox, they had 7 players who are eligible for arbitration. And of the ones that were non-tendered, none. So basically, they're pleased with who they got. And I wasn't sure how they were going to do this year with that or not, since they had such a fantastic year. Let's see. Looking here, let's see, who all were those people? The ones that they did offer contracts to were, pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez, Matt Barnes, Ryan Brazier, Austin Bryce, and Ryan Weber. And then also their catcher, Kevin Plawecki, and third baseman, Rafael Devers. So of the 7 that were arbitration eligible, all of them were signed.
And the Red Sox, they had a great year last year, so I think they should prioritize keeping that team together.
Yeah, they kind of surprised me too. It's like, I know they got Alex Cora back, but you still got to have something on the plate to serve up. I don't care who the chef is. So we'll see. And okay, the Chicago White Sox, always everybody's favorite. And let's take a look at what's happening with them. Let's see, they got a 1-year deal with Jace Fry. Mazzara, right fielder, 25. He was acquired in a trade with Texas in December of last year. But I think they're letting him go too. And then when we get to the Cubbies, I think you got some information more on them too.
Yeah, the Cubs made they were one of the big teams looking at non-tenders. Of course, bigger name, bigger attention with it. And a lot before the deadline, I was seeing that Kris Bryant, he possibly not be tendered. They let him go, possibly. But they ended up tendering him a contract. And they ended up letting go Kyle Schwarber, Jose Martinez, Albert Almora, and Ryan Tepera. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. And, Martinez, he wasn't very good with the Rays. He was horrible with the Cubs. He went 0 for 21 with 6 strikeouts, and he's getting paid $2 million. So that's a lot for no production. And Almora, he had only 30 at-bats, but he also only had 5 hits. So he didn't really contribute much either. And then looking at Schwarber, it kind of surprised me that they let him go. I mean, he's only 28 and he was going to earn around $8 million this coming year. And last year he hit 11 homers, 24 RBIs, only had a 188 batting average, but a 308 on-base percentage and 701 OPS. And he averages about 36 homers, 82 RBIs, and about a 230 batting average, 336 on-base percentage, 816 OPS. So, I mean, that's a guy I'd be willing to take a chance on, especially because he's a lefty. I believe as Buster Olney said, if he wants to win a championship and get paid a little bit more and rebound his career, I mean, I'd go to the Yankees because, I mean, they have that short porch and right. Imagine how many homers he'd hit there.
Oh, wow. That's insightful because there's no doubt. You look at some of these, you say, you tender them or you didn't tender them? And Kris Bryant was a lot of people were saying, oh, they will most definitely tender Kris Bryant. So I was a little surprised when to see he was there. Like you, I wasn't surprised like Jose Martinez. We've seen how he's done in the past, and he has been suffering the last couple of years, so that wasn't a big surprise there.
There were a couple of guys when I was reading through all this stuff that looking at them and it's like, why would you let this guy go? That's because I don't really know a whole lot about some of these teams, but it's like, why would you let that guy go? He's really productive.
You and I both, we've been checking all the daggone media and everything coming up with what everybody's saying. Even 2 or 3 days ago, some people were projecting as many as 75 players would be non-tendered. 75. And it was only, I think, 59. They thought it was 60, and then there was a trade made at the very last moment that wasn't reported. So there was only 59. So it is interesting to see what happens with these careers, these people that were not tendered, who are free agents now. Will they, like you were talking here with this pitcher, will they be going somewhere else like the Yankees? Where will they be? So I'm very curious about seeing that as well. And then, one guy, won't get completely into him, but with the Reds, we're talking about Trevor Bauer, and we see what happened with them. I mean, let's see, the Reds here, I think they just tendered Kyle Farmer, and he's a utility player out there. Let's see, were there a couple others there as well?
There was Brian Goodwin, Archie Bradley, RJ Alanis, and Kurt Casale.
Any surprises there? Do you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that?
Well, looking at Archie Bradley, he had his best year last year. He had a 2.95 ERA, 109 WHIP, 18 strikeouts, and 18 in the third innings. And he didn't start off so great with the Diamondbacks. He had an ERA around 4. But then when he came over to the Reds, that's when he really caught fire. His ERA with the Reds was down to around 1. So that brought his ERA down. And over his career, he has a 3.91 ERA with a 13.59 WHIP. And that seems like kind of like a guy, you could bring him in on the cheap because he was non-tendered. And, you bring him in, if he works out, great, you got him for cheap. And if he doesn't, oh, well, he didn't work out, at least you got him for cheap.
Yeah.
So kind of like what the Rays do with a bunch of guys.
Yeah, and just as we were saying, if they don't work out, what kind of trade can you work with them later on? Would they be, another player to be considered later? I don't know. And if we move on from the Reds to the Cleveland Indians, they had a total of 7 players who were arbitration eligible. Of those, let's see, 3 players I see that they non-tendered. That was Jeffrey Rodriguez. He's a right-hand pitcher for them. And then also a couple of outfielders, Tyler McQueen and Delino DeShields Jr. So that's who they had. And surprisingly not, they tendered contracts with Francisco Lindor, Austin Hedges, Nick Whitgren, and Phil Maton. Really? Francisco Lindor? Yeah. He's a legend, basically. You have him tendered a contract. So let's move on to the Rockies then. And of theirs, they tendered, 1, 2, 3, outfielder David Dahl, right-hand pitcher Chichi Gonzalez, and Tony Walters. And let's see, Dahl they were looking at him. He was projected to make, about $2.6 million, according to MLB trade rumors. He's in his third season of arbitration eligibility. And Wolfers was projected at $2.05 million. Gonzalez for $1.2 million in his first year of arbitration. So the Rockies sound like, they're trying to be a little, conservative. And if you look at Dahl, while he was the 10th overall pick by the Rockies in 2012, that was a few years ago. He made the All-Star team, he did a few other things, but he's also had some injuries. And you can well imagine any player who's been in the league since 2012 certainly will have had some injuries. Well, let's move on to the Tigers. If we look at the Detroit Tigers, they had nine players, who could have been non-tendered. But here they are, new manager, A.J. Hinch. And I guess they're not looking for any other change because they're going to keep. They've tendered a contract to each and every one of them. That includes people like Buck Farmer, Nico Goodrum, Jacoby Jones, and Daniel Norris. Just a few.
One of those guys is Matthew Boyd, and I've heard a lot of him being thrown around a lot. I remember last year, not 2020, but 2019, he was like a big trade candidate. And they couldn't trade him because they were asking like for the moon for him. And I'm wondering if they tendered him a contract now, and he's going to be like a trade candidate for them this year.
Well, that would make sense. And if he has value, you would think there'd be something more with that. But like I said, we were talking earlier. One of the reasons they may tend to contract is a value not just to themselves, but what they think they can get with them somewhere else. Okay, let's see. Astros, I don't have as much on here, but I know that they did tender contracts to Carlos Correa, infielder Diaz, and right-hander Lance McCullers. Lance McCullers Jr. I'm not surprised. Let's see. Earlier this off-season, they did go ahead and outright Roberto Osuna. And many would say he was the most notable non-contender candidate there was out there. Yeah, well, with Astros, I'm always just going to kind of move on. So,
did they tender a contract to the outfield camera and dugout trash can?
Yes, yeah. I'm sure that was a big part of it too. These guys were certainly recipients of our last week's Goofy Gobbler Awards on several occasions. So, yeah, that would have been one of them. So, moving on, we got the Kansas City Royals, and I know you got a little bit more information on that. So, why don't you go ahead and take that?
All right, so they let go guys Bubba Starling, Eric Meja. I believe that's how you pronounce it. If it's not, I apologize. Jason Guzman. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong as well. And Mikhail Franco. And I said earlier, there are some people going through this that I was really surprised. That was like, why would you let that guy go? He looks really productive. And this guy is one of them. And he's a third baseman, and he was non-tendered by the Phillies last year. And he went to the Royals after that, and now he's getting non-tendered again. And he was projected to earn between $4.5 and $8 million in his final year of arbitration eligibility. And Kansas City, they looked at it as a low risk, high reward, signing him. And he went last year. He hit .278 with .321, .457 with 8 home runs and 38 RBIs and only 243 plate appearances. And over his career, he averages 25 homers, 86 RBIs, .252 batting average, a 304 on base percentage, and a 737 OPS. So honestly, this is a guy I would love to bring in, especially because it'd be low risk, high reward.
He was 4.5 to 8.5 million, and
Correct.
he tendered a contract. I misunderstood the beginning of that.
He was with the Phillies, and he was non-tendered, and then he ended up going to Kansas City.
And with Kansas City, was he tendered this year?
No, he was non-tendered.
It's interesting to see because I think with that kind of record for that kind of results he's been churning up, definitely is going to keep him as a valuable player.
Yeah, I'd love to pick him up, especially if I need a third baseman or a hitter. I'd love to take him.
Okay, moving on to the LA Angels. They had 7 players that were arbitration eligible. And bing, 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 bing. I think they've actually, let's see, look at they non-tendered 5 right-handers. And no, a total of 5. Right, 4 right-handers and 1 left-hander. The right-handers, Justin Anderson, Matt Andriese. That's a name Rays fans are familiar with. And I look at some of these and wonder if we'll see maybe them come back here. Kanan Middleton, Hansel Robles, and left-hander Hobie Milner. So Matt Andriese, I'd love to see him come back maybe to the Rays. We'll see how that works out. But those folks were given a non-tender from the Angels.
Hey, the Rays could use another pitcher, and he'd be cheap. So
Exactly.
It seems like a match made in heaven.
Exactly. So that's how that went with them. Let's see the Dodgers. A World Series winning the Dodgers. They had 6 folks that were arbitration eligible. Now, how many do you think that they non-tendered?
See, they had 6 that were eligible. I'm going to go with they signed everybody. They're going to go the Boston route and bring everybody back.
That's right. And they've got reason to. I can't speak for Boston, but the Dodgers certainly had reason to. I mean, who would non-tender a World Series winning team player? There would have to be something crazy going on. So great team. I mean, it's amazing who they've got. It's amazing what they did. So, but it's not amazing that there were no changes. Wow. Speaking of another team that made it to the postseason, but didn't get as far as I think a lot of us like to see, and that was the Miami Marlins. And I'm going to let you pick that one up too. I mean, these guys had I think 8 arbitration eligible players.
Yeah, they had 8 arbitration eligible pitchers, and they let go of, or they did not tender Ryan Stanek, who was with the Rays and has really seemed to have fallen off ever since he was traded to Miami. With the Rays, he had a 3.55 ERA and is roughly year and a half with the Marlins. ERA went up to his ERA is 6.03 with them. So taking a bit of a dip in production ever since he left Tampa Bay.
I was reading, I know, and I loved Ryan Stanek. I love the whole idea. He created that role as opener. Kevin Cash, and he put that together when he was playing with the Rays at the beginning, bang, 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 bang. And initially, I was surprised when the Rays did trade him, but they did, and maybe they saw something a lot of the rest of us didn't. And looking at the Marlins too, one of the names I kept hearing pop up time and time again is, one guy they will non-tender, and that will be Jesus Aguilar. Well, surprising not that he is. Not only was he tendered on a contract, he actually came to an agreement before the non-tender deadline. So that was something too. And they've actually retained 2 first basemen with this through this deadline, and that was Jesus Aguilar and Garrett Cooper. So not surprisingly, Jesus Aguilar, I think he brings a lot of positive energy to the team. I mean, this year he's going to be making $4.35 million. Wow. So he obviously has some value to them. And Garrett Cooper, the other first baseman, is going to be making $1.8 million. So congratulations to both of those guys. And I hope things go well with Ryan Stanek, because he's one of my favorite players. Just fun to be with. That's all I'll say. I got to meet him once, and he seemed like a real stand-up guy. Let's move on to the Brewers. Now, One of theirs folks won a Goofy Gobbler last week, didn't he? No, or was he just nominated? It was Mr. Yelich.
No, I believe he won.
He won, okay.
And at least I won something.
Yeah, because he was suffering so much. Now, if we continue to look at the Brewers, one thing we'll discover is that they did non-tender some players. There were some that were not offered an agreement, and that's Ben Gamel, Alex Claudio, and Jace Peterson. Also, one name we kept hearing a lot too, much like Aguilar said, well, Corey Knebel, he's going to be non-tendered. But instead, they did. I guess they signed him and then traded him to the Dodgers. Yeah, that was neat.
I believe that was the last minute, like right at the deadline too. I believe
it was, because it had already been reported that he was non-tendered, and the report actually came out a little after 8:00. So, sorry guys, we're wrong. Corey actually does have a place somewhere. It's, he's been offered something. It's not actually with the Brewers. He's been moved to the Dodgers in agreement with them. So there you go. Next up is the Minnesota Twins, with 7 players who are eligible for arbitration this year. And they did make decisions on actually non-tendering a couple of their players that they did not offer contracts to. Let's see, and that's Eddie Rosario and Matt Whistler. It's kind of interesting, too, when you kind of look at the history of the Twins, of some of the people they've non-tendered in the past. I mean, even starting pitchers like Jake Odorizzi, in the past. He was one of them. And looking from the Rays perspective, reliever Sergio Romo was non-tendered years ago. So it's interesting when you look across, the history, much like what happened this December 2nd, what happened in previous years, and what those players were able to do once they left there. Now, everybody's favorite, those Savages from New York City, the New York Yankees. And they've only non-tendered one player. That was their right-hand pitcher, Jonathan Holder. You got to get more, but like Aguilar, there was a name you would hear. I hear Kris Bryant a lot. And then there was another guy we'd hear the name quite a bit, and that was Gary Sanchez.
Yes, and before I get into him, the Yankees are award-nominated, Goofy Gobbler award-nominated New York Yankees. And yes, Gary Sanchez is one of the bigger names out there with non-tender candidates, and he was their most notable. And I know a lot of Yankee fans out there, at least I saw on Twitter, they weren't really sure if they wanted him back. They'd rather have the catcher who was their backup catcher most of this year. I can't think of his name. I apologize. But they seemed like they were okay with letting Sanchez go, even though, according to some people, Gary is scary. They ended up tendering him a contract along with Luis Cessa and Ben Heller, who were one-year contracts.
Well, there you go. All that hullabaloo from everybody saying, oh, Gary Sanchez, Kris Bryant. Guess what, guys? You had it wrong. Sorry to say. That's why I didn't say anything about it in the past, because I knew I would have had it wrong. I would have thought Kris Bryant and Sanchez both would have been non-tendered. So wasn't complete. I was a little bit surprised when that happened.
I was going to say, who knows? Maybe Sanchez could be like a trade candidate, like Matthew Boyd possibly could have been with the Tigers.
Well, that's true. And I'm wondering, with the Rays, we've been talking before, with Mikey Perez gone, who are they going to be bringing in as another catcher? And, kind of pose the idea, will somebody be trading for somebody like Wilson Ramos? Ramos, big man, got a few years on him, but still a strong individual. Or, maybe the Yankees could be looking at this, and Mr. Sanchez, maybe they would trade him. I don't know. We'll see. The Oakland Athletics, and they had 10 players who were arbitration eligible. And of those 10 players, the number of those that they did not tender a contract was 0. And of the 10 players, 4 of them actually signed agreements before the non-tender deadline came to play. One of those, let's see, Matt Chapman. Yeah, we remember him. And the other ones they did, let's see, Marquino, Chris Bassett, Sean Mancey, right-hand pitcher Frank Montes, and reliever Lou Trevino. No deals for the remaining 6 have been announced, but they've been tendered, so that's good. Things are moving along there. The Phillies.
Did we skip over the Mets?
We did. Thank you. Let's bring it back. Boom. Sorry. Okay, what do we got here for the Mets?
Let's see. Looking at the Mets, they had 4 players that were non-tendered. That includes pitchers Chasen Shreve, Ariel Jurado, Paul Sewald, and Nick Chopiano. So
Bingo.
I apologize if I pronounced any of their
Oh,
names
quit
wrong.
apologizing. We know we all get their names wrong, so that's understandable. Yeah, so we're looking at but the guys they did tender contract to were like Michael Conforto and Brad Nimmo, shortstop Ahmed Rosario, starting pitcher Noah Syndergaard, no surprise there, and relievers Edwin Diaz and Seth Lugo. So, again, not surprised to see that Noah Syndergaard will still be there. All right, so sorry guys, I did skip over the Mets. And then the Phillies, did I say anything about them? I know I was going to, but that's right. Phillies basically had 4 that were arbitration eligible. And I know this much, they did sign catcher Andrew Knapp and right-hander Seranthony Dominguez, Zach Elfin, David Hale, and Hector Neris to 1-year contracts, and so they were avoiding arbitration. So of the 4 guys that were eligible, they had already gone and signed all this. So there was no reason for anybody to be non-tendered or tendered. Agreements were already in place.
It's surprising the Phillies could bring all these guys back because apparently they lost about $2 billion last year.
I thought that was the entire MLB, man. Let's see the Pirates. It's one player I see that's non-tendered. That's Clay Holmes. Yeah, they also DFA'd a guy last week, Will Craig. Moving on to the Padres, one of my favorite teams. And one I was really curious to see what happened because they had 6 guys who were arbitration eligible and only 1 was non-tendered, and that's infielder Greg Garcia. Now, a name that a lot of people thought would be in that non-tendered, Tommy Pham. He's had his injuries and all that, even the ones sustained outside a parking lot in a strip joint from a knife in the back, which he's listed, I think, as in a lawsuit against that company as a catastrophic event or catastrophic injury. If that was the case, I didn't know physically if Tommy'd be able to do anything, but I think he said that he is, and I'm sure that, and Tommy's a man of intensity and accomplishment, so I'm sure the Padres said, well, if anybody come back on this, if he's got any injuries, Tommy certainly will.
Yeah, and last year he didn't have his greatest year. He hit only .211, .312 on base percentage, .624 OPS, and 3 homers and 12 RBIs. So that was a bit below average for him, but he also does bring a lot more off the field, in that leadership role. That was something we always talk about when he was here with the Rays.
No doubt. I mean, leadership and intensity, he demands a lot of himself on the field, and he's not afraid to say that about his teammates either. Some of the other guys with the Padres that are coming back, right-hand pitchers Dan Altavilla and Zach Davies, Dinelson Lemay, and Emilio Pagan. So hope Emilio continues to do well with his career also, so I'm glad to see he's still with the Padres. Let's move on to the Giants. Who did they non-tender? Lefty Tyler Anderson. You got to love that name. Anybody who has Lefty as a name. Lefty Tyler Anderson was non-tendered, and so was infielder Daniel Robertson. And I got to tell you, Daniel Robertson was a guy that I thought continually should have been DFA'd. I think that when he was with the Rays, he was I think Cash liked him, the team liked him, he was a very likable guy. But I think Daniel always had difficulty maintaining some, strong stats to say in the majors.
Yeah, everybody really liked him, but it seems like he didn't have what it takes to stay afloat here in the majors, and even in San Francisco.
Well, I wish him and Lefty, a great success beyond this. Maybe as free agents, they'll see something out there. Looking at other deals that were negotiated already, with the Giants, and that's, let's see, Alex Dickerson. And then they also have Austin Slater, Darren Roof, Arlene Garcia, Wandy Peralta, and Trevor Gott. So that's all happening there, too. The Mariners, if we move on to them, I'm seeing that no, they didn't tender anybody. They've got they actually had 34 contracts tendered. So they're moving along. They don't see any room for change. Some theoretical stuff's going out there. People saying, well, they might trade or buy for Blake Snell. It's Blake Snell's old hometown and that sort of thing. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but that's certainly a part of it. Next, the St. Louis Cardinals. And the Cardinals, what can we tell you about them? One fella, Brebbia, he's going to become a free agent with the Cardinals. He's basically, let's see, him. And one reason they're doing that, they're non-tendering Brebbia, is because you see these players get like Tommy John surgery and all that, and they think, oh, do I want to bring him back? I mean, they're going to have to offer him a deal worth about $800,000 for a new contract. But, instead of bringing him back, they elected to allow him to become a free agent. So best wishes to him as well. Now let's get something where we know you and I both have a little history with the Tampa Bay Rays. And these guys got 7 players that were arbitration eligible. And not unlike the Mariners, not unlike the Tigers, not unlike the Red Sox, they tendered absolutely no one. So of the 7 players that they could have tendered or non-tendered agreement with, basically they said no. So a lot of people were looking, I hear some people saying, well, we're looking at Alvarado and Yanni Chirinos between injuries and guys who just haven't been as good as we thought they'd be. Thought maybe they wouldn't be there. Another one I heard people were saying was G-Man Choi. I thought, G-Man Choi? No. G-Man Choi you would definitely tender an agreement with. The man's energy, excitement, what he brings to the bat. And I know that's not always what everybody expects him to do at plate, but he brings an excitement, and he does well, and he does fantastic splits on first base. So he definitely was signed as well. So all you naysayers about G-Man Choi, shame on you.
Wait, so they were tendered, or they weren't, or they were non-tendered?
They were non-tendered. They did sign. There was nobody was non-tender. There was no non-tenders. Is that a double negative? Can I say that?
Oh, okay. I'll start off for a little bit. Like, there's a lot of guys who are letting go.
No. That was a lot of the people I was talking about, Alvarado, Yanni Chirinos, and Choi, where you would hear a lot of commentators. Well, I think they're going to non-tender them, this, that, and the other. And it's like, cheese and crackers, man, wake up. No. So, I mean, I could see why Yanni Chirinos might, but I was glad to see that the Rays are going to stick it out with him. Texas Rangers, they non-tendered a couple. Danny Santana, and then outfielder Scott Heineman, and right-handed reliever Jim Herget. I'm not going to tell you to see enough about them. See, Santana, they say he stood to make the most money in arbitration. Last year, he agreed in arbitration to $3.6 million, but he's also had some Tommy John surgery, and he may or may not have been ready for opening day. So Danny Santana, Scott Heineman, and Jimmy Herget were non-tendered by the Texas Rangers. Don't you find it interesting that the whole idea on December 2nd is not talking about who's been tendered agreement, it's about who's been non-tendered.
Yeah, that is. That's kind of like a focusing on the negative thing.
Yeah, and baseball, I think sometimes does. But anyway, so that's who it is for those folks. And then from our friends way up north, of course, this year they weren't quite up as north. They were in, Buffalo, the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yeah, looking at the Blue Jays, they non-tendered A.J. Cole and Travis Shaw, another third baseman, and he's another one of those guys I was talking about earlier that's like, why would you let him go? He's 30 years old, and he ended last year with a 239, 306, 411 slash line with 6 home runs to go with 17 RBIs and a 717 OPS and only 180 plate appearances. And over his career, he averages 26 homers, 83 RBIs, a 243 average, 325 on base percentage, and a 773 OPS.
Wow. I think one of the biggest challenges there with Travis is you're looking at, some other players, I mean, not pitchers, but other players that you want to probably keep are people like Rowdy Tellez and Vlad Jr., on the roster. And I don't know. I mean, they weren't making any other changes out there, but that's probably why Travis Shaw was cut.
Yeah, that has to be the only reason because, I mean, he's been really productive over his career, even last year in a shortened season.
We'll see how that plays out next year, too. So that's interesting. The Blue Jays, I think, they're a team with still a lot of potential. When you think about all the youth they have there with Bo Bichette and some of the other ones, it's going to be an exciting year, I think, for the Blue Jays next year. Lastly, let's take a look for the World Series winners of not last year, but 2 years back, the Washington Nationals. I don't have all the information on them, but one of the things I know is that they've got Juan Soto and also Turner. They're going to be returning. So basically, they're going to have until January 15th to agree to terms on their 2021 salaries. And that's, I was saying February before, but I think it's actually they have to have it done by then. And if they don't have it by then it goes to arbitration. So we'll see how that is.
Yeah, those two seem like pretty obvious choices to bring back.
Yeah, if they didn't bring back either one of those guys, I think, people would be scratching their heads. I mean, I kept watching Juan Soto so much. He's such another entertaining player, a high-performance player, exciting, young. I'd keep him, if nothing else, just to trade him. I mean, good heavens, I don't think he'd have any trouble whatsoever getting something for him with another team. He's fantastic. Between him and Trey Turner, wow, why wouldn't you? I mean, as of the other night, though, they're the only remaining unsigned arbitration-eligible players. So everybody else, they've tendered contracts, I guess, to everyone else to all of them, but Juan Soto and Trey Turner are the only ones who have not yet to actually sign an agreement. So we'll see how that goes. So that's kind of a wrap for the December 2nd, 2020 non-tender deadline, or tender deadline, and what is happening with that. We'll talk a little bit more next week, too, about Rule 5. We're not going to get in that today, but there's a Rule 5 deadline, and we'll explain what that means next week. But this week, we still have to look at a lot of people who were already free agents before all this happened. Through this non-tender deadline, there were 59 players who basically have no place to go at the moment. They're all free agents. Talk about sounding negative. Who have new opportunities with some place to go soon. And so that's 59 players out there. Then you have the other players who were free agents who have been established in Major League Baseball for more than 6 years and are free agents just by that qualification. And there's still some heavy hitters out there. Last week, Brandon, you and I were talking about in 2019, it wasn't until February that Harper, the Phillies, and then Machado, both of them didn't sign until February. So who we got now? Who's on the hot plate? What's cooking, Brandon?
Well, it's still been a little bit slow. Of course, we had Charlie Morton sign last week with the Braves. The biggest name that's signed so far has been Eduardo Rodriguez, of course, the starting pitcher. He signed with the Red Sox, and he missed this year with complications from having the coronavirus, and he had heart problems, which was a result of that. So he missed this year, and he signed with the Red Sox. And also Trevor May, a reliever, he was with the Twins last year. He reached a 2-year deal with the Mets. So he's going to end up pitching in the Big Apple, the first signing of the Steve Cohen era. And Corey Kluber, another big name. He didn't have the greatest year, of course, the past couple of years. He's had injury problems, but he is having great interest from the Red Sox. And last year he had a major muscle strain that shortened last year, and he's expected to throw bullpen sessions this month, according to John Morosi. But he is being pursued pretty heavily from the Red Sox.
So Mr. Cohen with the Mets, he talked about having a blueprint for success. So who all, again, do you think he's going to try to bring into that roster?
I've heard, he's going to try to get, the big four guys. He's going to try and get Bauer in there. Who else? Real Muto as well. And he said he's not afraid to spend money. And put your money where your mouth is and get the two of the bigger free agents out there, or at least a couple of them, and you turn things around in a hurry.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, the man says I think he's got the money to spend. I think he will. I don't think he's going to worry about too much of a luxury tax, but we'll see how that plays out. And I'm excited about it. So the hot stove's there. I mean, maybe cooling off. It seems like it gets hot and then it cools down a little bit and it gets hot again. From what I've seen in a lot of these agreements, even from the ones that have been tendered in the non-tender agreement and elsewhere, a lot of one-year contracts look like they're evolving here, Brandon. Have you seen that?
Yeah, a lot of people have been getting the one-year contracts, and of course that's probably because both sides, players and teams, don't really know what the future financial will be like, because coming off this shortened year, how much it'll bounce back over the next coming years. So that seems kind of like a safer option for both teams.
You mean for both teams? You mean for both parties?
Yes, not teams.
Okay, I didn't know you were talking about the Yankees and the Mets. No, but seriously, yes, agreed. Because I was wondering, he said, who's the advantage to on this, the one-year contract? I'm hearing it from both sides, like you, because I was wondering. I said, is this something where they're shortchanging a player? Is this something where a player's allowing them flexibility? I understand it with somebody like Charlie Morton for a couple of reasons. One, Charlie has said, he was, when he came even to Tampa, he was talking about potentially retiring. And then also when he goes to someplace else for another year, I mean, he did his 2 years here and he may have retired anyway, but I think after World Series and everything else to boot, I would love to have kept Charlie here, but obviously didn't. And as long as we're talking about Charlie, I love it that, he's now with the Braves and Mr. Darno is still there. So two Rays who are going to be there pitching back and forth to the plate.
It could benefit younger guys too, the one-year deals, because they could, be a free agent this year and maybe they had like a good year last year or the year before, and teams could use the one-hit wonder excuse, and they could take a prove-it deal for 1 year and have another great year and end up getting even more money when it comes down to it.
Well, I wish them all well, and I'm always pulling for both. I'm pulling for the fans, man. I'm pulling for a great experience, and whatever happens with these contracts, I'm hoping that we actually are able to get some fans back into the ballparks and to the stadiums. I want to be able to make sure that we can enjoy this as much as possible. I've been very thankful that they have been able to play and that we've been able to watch those 60 games as opposed to having a big X shutout for the entire year. So that I'm very thankful for, man. I don't know about you, but to me, I'm not going to be surprised about any kind of agreement. And the one-year agreements in this time, I'm not seem almost, a good fit for a time when you don't know how many games you're going to be playing this year. Well, we hope you've enjoyed yet another good time with Baseball Biz here with Brandon, Mr. Brandon No Way, that is. And you can find him on Twitter at TheSportsBlitz1. That's the numeric one, TheSportsBlitz1. And you can find myself at TheBaseballBiz at both on Twitter. And also you can listen to us anytime you like on virtually every podcast directory, whether it be Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, wherever we're out there. We want to thank you guys. We love you, and we're really glad to have you here as listeners. We hope you see you again next week. And until then, enjoy every day, be safe, and we'll see you soon. Special thanks to Xtake RUX for the music Rocking Forward, and for our associate producer, Christina Hussey.